I'm going to go deep with these rankings because I know, yes, you're probably dealing with injuries. And yes, we probably have to look at some gross wide receivers this week. Tier 1, though, I mean, everybody is starting these guys. Yes, St. Brown, Chase, Lamb, Jefferson. Maybe your head just exploded when you saw me put Jamar Chase at 2. But let's remember, guys, what did Tampa do to this Washington defense in week 1? What did Malik Neighbors just do to this Washington defense in week 2 with Daniel Jones as his quarterback? This is the blow-up week for Jamar Chase. This is the blow-up week for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's now or never. I think it's happening. I may be a little bit biased having him in the flock league, but none of these rankings matter at the top. You start them regardless. Tier 2, we are going to go ahead. We're going to put Nico Collins at 5. Nico didn't practice on Wednesday, so that will be something to monitor. He's dealing with a couple nagging injuries here, but we've seen Nico has established himself as the alpha wide receiver in Houston with one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL. Devonta Smith will be my wide receiver at 6. Now, I know this is also very aggressive. Going up against the Saints, right now, sportsbooks are projecting this to be one of the highest scoring games in the NFL this week. You have no A.J. Brown for sure. We saw what the target share looked like for Devonta Smith last week. I think Smith comes out and just absolutely crushes. Garrett Wilson at 7. I know Wilson's been bad, but that's just because the passing volume hasn't been there for the Jets. Wilson still is accounting for over 33% of the overall passing production here in New York. So I think this week against the Pats, where this offense is kind of in a good get right spot, I think Garrett Wilson really breaks out. Rashee Rice at 8. With Rice, clearly we have seen the slant action. We had seen the check down in his rookie season and in week 1. But in week 2, you got the vertical element. You had Rashee Rice go over the top for that receiving touchdown. Going up against Atlanta, I think this is actually a situation in which you may have the Chiefs skewing a little more pass happy with no Isaiah Pacheco, which would be very good because obviously it's been a team that's been running the hell out of the ball through the first 2 weeks. Brandon Ayuk will be our next guy at 9. We actually just had a massive trade go down in the flock league regarding Brandon Ayuk, but I think he is set up to absolutely smash with no Deebo Samuel. It's clear the games that Deebo has missed, Brandon Ayuk has been much better than the games that Deebo has played. Ayuk gets another week to acclimate into this offense where he wasn't there all of training camp. Against this Rams secondary, you should have no issues whatsoever. We just saw what Marvin Harrison Jr. did, and you have an implied team total of 27 points for this Niners offense. And then speaking of Harrison, he'll be in here at 10. Yes, Harrison was a must-start guy for us last week after a blow-up spot. Now he's still a must-start guy, just an even better option. I think you can put him as a top 10 guy rest of season, especially in this game against Detroit where we just saw Godwin go off, and Vegas telling us it's going to be the highest scoring game in the NFL this week. Devontae Adams at 11, to be honest with you, will be lower than this in most of our rankings going forward. You're just playing a JV team here with Carolina right now. Yes, the JV-A team just sent down their starting quarterback to JV-B, and they're calling up the JV-B quarterback, Andy Dalton, to be there in Carolina, but that's not going to help the Panthers secondary. That's not going to help their defense. You actually have a 23-point implied team total for the Raiders here, which is by far and away the most that we have seen all year from these projections. So I think Devontae Adams crushed last week. I think Adams is set up to crush in a great matchup this week. And then we will put Tyreek Hill in here at 12. Now, obviously, rest of season, I will have Tyreek Hill ranked higher than this. I believe on the site, Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 6 rest of season. But this week, we know Tua's not coming back. I mean, we know Tua is going to be gone for about a month. There's going to be no passing volume here. It's going to be one of the worst offenses in the league. You have an implied team total of 17.5 points. I'd imagine that's similar to what we are seeing with Malik Willis in Green Bay right now. You're actually probably seeing this offense just run the ball over and over and over again. So I'm very much concerned with Tyreek Hill. Now, he's, of course, Tyreek Hill, so I think you could still rank him as a top 12 wide receiver, but you just have to have dramatically lower expectations than normally. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin back-to-back. Baker Mayfield has been absolutely phenomenal. I actually had a question in last night's live stream. Somebody was a little bit worried about Mike Evans, but if we're going to be realistic here, I mean, we've seen this since 2020. I know 2019, that's when Godwin broke out here in this Bucs offense. You have 1 week being an Evans week, the next week being a Godwin week, and kind of going back and forth between the two guys. I think that Godwin's usage in the slot obviously is massively beneficial to Chris Godwin himself. That's why he's much higher in our rankings this week than he was previously. Godwin's at the very top of total fantasy points scored at wide receiver right now. But I do still think that Mike Evans is Mike Evans, going to have a ton of touchdown equity in this offense. Chris Olave will be our next guy at 15. With Olave, I'm actually really excited to see what he looks like this week, because the issue that you've had with the New Orleans Saints is they have boat raced the first two teams that they have played. So we have not had the ability to see what this offense looks like when they're behind. We have not had the ability to see what this offense looks like in a close game in general. Now, against the Philadelphia Eagles, the spread's only 1.5, so it should be a closer game. I mean, obviously, you do have the Eagles favored here, but still, I'm very interested to see what happens with Olave. DJ Moore, we can put a little asterisk on this ranking, because as of now, we don't know if DJ Moore is going to be a wide receiver that is competing with Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen, maybe only competing with Rome Odunze. Keenan was not at practice on Wednesday. Of course, I'm going to keep you updated with the injuries that we have throughout the week, but as it stands right now, looks like DJ Moore is set up again to be an alpha in a bad offense. I have a little more faith in the Bears offense turning it around, however, in a spot against Indy with the 20.5 point implied team total than I do with the Giants. So Malik Neighbors will be our next guy at 17. Now, based off how good Malik Neighbors has been through the first 2 weeks, head over to the site and you'll see that Malik Neighbors is right there almost as a top 5 wide receiver for me in Dynasty. I think Malik Neighbors has solidified himself as a receiver that will be the face of the NFL for years to come, or not the face, but one of the faces of the league. The talent is ridiculous. The man accounted for almost 70 to 75% of the passing offense in New York this past week, and a great matchup against Washington. Daniel Jones was able to effectively move the ball down the field, and Neighbors was phenomenal for that reason. He was a must-start guy for us last week. He's still kind of that must-start guy for us this week, still being a high-end wide receiver too. My thing is, it's just a garbage offense. It's a garbage matchup going up against Cleveland. You have an implied team total of 16 points here. Daniel Jones is still cheeks. I don't want you to forget that. And yeah, if we're going to knock Tyreek to move Tyreek Hill down to 12 in these rankings because of his bad quarterback play, I feel like there's no way we could then turn around and rank Malik Neighbors at like 13, right? So we'll have Neighbors at 17. If you go to the site, he is a little bit higher in my rest of season rankings, but this week it's a tougher matchup. Now going over to our next guy, we will have DK Metcalf going up against Miami. So I am a little concerned for Metcalf long-term. Once you end up getting back in, specifically Kenneth Walker into this offense, when Walker's in here, I think all of a sudden you're probably in a situation in which we should expect the Seahawks to be a little more run heavy than what we saw this past week. Now, what we saw this past week is Geno Smith have 49 dropbacks in comparison to Zach Charbonnet with 14 rush attempts. So it may appear to be another Charbonnet game, but I don't know if this game goes to overtime against Miami. I mean, you have a 7-point spread where last week, obviously, the pass game was extremely close. So I think maybe they're a little more run heavy regardless. Obviously, we know the role of DK Metcalf. If you're looking at the Underdog pick'ems right now, they currently have DK Metcalf higher, lower, 61.5 receiving yards. They have him with the 1.34x multiplier to score a touchdown. They have JSN at 1.54x. So they have JSN and Metcalf relatively close. But of course, if you wanted to check out any of those picks, you can find them over on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description and comment section. If you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, with code FLOCK, you will also be getting a free Aaron Rodgers pick, more than less than half a total yard, for Thursday night, and a free CeeDee Lamb pick for Sunday night. Now, if you sign up after the Thursday night game, then instead you're just going to get an additional Sunday free pick. But regardless, 2 free picks if you're new to Underdog with code FLOCK, the 50% deposit bonus, and a free team review in one of our live streams that we are hosting every single night. You can find that link in the description and comment section. Going over to our next guy, we will have Drake London. London going up against KC is in an interesting situation. One, we know that the Kansas City Chiefs have one of the best defenses in the NFL. It's unfair. It does not seem like it should be a thing, but it is a thing. Defensive coordinator, probably the best in the league. We saw this team just shut down Jamar Chase this past week. We saw week 1 them really limit both Mark Andrews as well as Zay Flowers. If you look at the pick for Drake London on Underdog, he's at higher, lower, 61.5 receiving yards. I think London, I actually have him higher than this in my rest of season rankings. It's just a tough matchup, even if the Falcons will have to throw the ball in the second half. Now, Zay Flowers will be our next guy at 20. With Flowers going up against Dallas, that actually should be one of the highest scoring games in the NFL this week. Now, what's very interesting is if you look at the usage with 12 personnel from week 1 to week 2 for this Baltimore Ravens offense. It was so crazy to see how good Isaiah Likely was week 1. And then they go into week 2 and they go, okay, yeah, we don't need to get 2 tight ends on the field for every snap. No, let's actually only have Isaiah Likely run half the routes possible in this offense. Let's have him out there for less than half the snaps. So if that is the case where you don't have a ton of targets being funneled both to Andrews and Likely, then obviously Zay Flowers is in a situation in which he can see a 25% team target share. There is no wide receiver 2 in this offense. So I really want to see the packages that they run out against the Dallas Cowboys. I want to see if they get more Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely on the field together. Because if that does happen, then all of a sudden I do expect the Flowers target share to come down slightly compared to where it was last week. If you look at Flowers's pick'em on Underdog, he's actually at higher, lower 53.5 receiving yards. Obviously lower than what you have with London and Metcalf. And then T. Higgins will be our next guy at 21. With Higgins, obviously massive asterisks here. I will tell you that if I had him on my team, where I have Chase, so I just hope Chase blows him out of the water. But if I had T. Higgins, I would be starting T. Higgins if he plays. Now, there's a big difference between playing in terms of, oh, he practiced on Thursday, he practiced on Friday, he's cleared and good to go by the time we get to Saturday. That's a different situation versus, oh, he didn't really practice, he's a game time decision, and then we learn right before the game starts that he's going to play. If that's the situation in which, oh, he's a game time decision, we learn right before it starts that he's going to play, I probably don't want him on my lineup. But if we get clarity that he's cleared well before the game, I think that Higgins is in the best matchup you could possibly ask for. An offense that's supposed to be the highest scoring team in the NFL this week. So I would be comfortable taking the upside that you have with Higgins. Going over to our next 2 guys, we will have Diggs and Dell. It's just tough when Nico looks like the certified alpha here in Houston. Nico is banged up a bit, like we mentioned. I know Dell has done absolutely nothing. And full transparency with you, I passed on Dell in the Flock League. And at the same time, I took a bunch of Diggs in underdog drafts, and I never really drafted Tank Dell. So I'm hoping that Dell continues to flop. But the reality of the situation is, if you look at the underlying targets, if you look at the air yards that Tank Dell has had through the first 2 weeks here, I actually think that Tank Dell will be much better going into the future than what he has been. I still expect this to be one of the best passing offenses in the entire NFL. And this week, they may have no Joe Mixon. Now, obviously, maybe they use Cam Akers, but I mean, if you're telling me, okay, you have no Joe Mixon, you have no Dameon Pierce, Cam Akers is going to be your guy, the last thing I think of is, all right, we got to get 30 running back carries in this offense this week. That's what we need to build our game plan around. No, I think they probably build around CJ Stroud, build around the receivers, and we see a ton of passing volume here in Houston. I mean, going over and looking at the Stroud pick that you have on Underdog, I actually really would not mind going higher than 265.5 passing yards for CJ Stroud this week. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Jamison Williams is a wide receiver that is absolutely crushed through the first 2 weeks. Jamison's at higher, lower, 51.5 receiving yards on Underdog currently. He's at higher, lower, 22.5 yards being his longest reception. We kind of know who Jamison is, right? Jamison is going to be that vertical field stretching option that will provide a ton of space underneath, but now you're getting additional targets going in his direction based off, one, Sam Laporta being a complete dud. I really hope Laporta picks it up soon. And 2, the passing volume in this offense just kind of going through the roof. You had 55 pass attempts from Jared Goff last week. So if Jared Goff comes anywhere close to that going into the future, you can have St. Brown and Jamison both eating at the same time. Going up against the Arizona Cardinals here, this should be the highest scoring game of the week. So I think you try to start as many Cardinals and Lions as you can. I'm going over to Amari Cooper at 25. Amari's done nothing this year, 29 receiving yards. He's had a lot of volume, but if you look at the other receivers here, Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore have had a lot of volume as well, and they're doing more with that volume than what you've had from Amari Cooper. Going up against the Giants, this is probably one of the lower scoring games of the week. But I do think Amari's definitely going to be better in the future than what he's been through the first 2. Michael Pittman Jr. at 26. With Pittman, you maybe have Josh Downs coming back this week. And if Josh Downs makes it back this week, then all of a sudden you're in a situation in which the low volume passing attack gets spread out even a little more. Alec Pierce has had all the passing volume in this offense so far through the first 2 weeks. I'd actually expect some of that Pierce volume to be going over to Adonai Mitchell as the season goes on. But in the case of Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs coming in is honestly not a good thing because Downs isn't one of those vertical field stretchers. Josh Downs instead is one of those wide receivers that's going to operate around the line of scrimmage and actually take up a few of these targets. And Pittman's already been very bad. Calvin Ridley at 27. The main thing that I want to focus on with Calvin Ridley is the expanded role from DeAndre Hopkins. This coaching staff told us after week 1, yeah, you're going to see a lot more DeAndre Hopkins going into the future. DeAndre Hopkins did take a step upwards. I think he played about 50% of the snaps last week. If we see this trend continue, where all of a sudden you are seeing DeAndre Hopkins possibly out there for 75% of the snaps, 80% of the snaps in Tennessee, I do think that Ridley sees his target volume come down just a bit. And at the same time, you're going up against the Packers. Right now, sportsbooks are projecting this to be one of the lowest scoring games in the NFL this week. So you're in a low volume passing attack where competition's kind of being added in. I know Ridley's been solid through the first 2, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last. Now, our next guy will be Jalen Waddle. Now, I have Waddle in the Flock League. Sadly, I'm having to start him. Wish I didn't, because it's going to be a very tough scene with no Tua. Not only is it a tough scene with no Tua in terms of the total points scored in this offense, but as we've mentioned, I personally would expect that this is a team that looks to lean on the run, similar to what we are seeing in Green Bay at this point. I think you get a lot of Devon Achane. I think you get a lot of Raheem Mostert. I don't think you pick up many first downs. I don't think you have many trips to the red zone. So Waddle is a very difficult player to project out with the 17.5 point implied team total. I hope he crushes it. But yeah, I don't think you can rank him anything more as a wide receiver 3 until we see him produce otherwise without Tua, because he's never produced without Tua in his NFL career. Going over to Xavier Worthy at 29. Worthy is higher in our rankings this week than he was last week. This is despite, obviously, Worthy coming off a much worse game in week 2 than he had in week 1. But Worthy actually had more volume last week. Worthy had 4 targets in comparison to 3 targets, so you're seeing the volume go in the right direction. Obviously, that's not a big deal, but what is a big deal is we know there's no Hollywood Brown. Not only do we know that there's no Hollywood Brown, but at the same time, this is a team with no Isaiah Pacheco, so we're going to assume that they're a little more pass happy this week than they were through the first 2. So while Xavier Worthy was one of those guys that I really wanted to put on our bench in week 2, and week 3, I'd be a little more interested to play him. Obviously, you're just kind of considering him for that flex. If we begin to see 5-6 targets a game for Worthy, I think at that point you could actually bump him the tier higher than this. Now, going over to George Pickens, going up against the Chargers, this is yet again one of the lowest projected total points scored in any game in the NFL this week. You have an implied team total of 19 points with this Pittsburgh Steelers team. We know they want to win games the ugly way. They know they're not going to be able to just get into a full-blown shootout and try to win. They're going to try to run the ball with the combination of Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, and now Justin Fields, and they're going to try to play great defense. The passing volume has been extremely low with Fields under center, as you would expect. There's no reason to believe that that changes in week 3. This Chargers offense has been phenomenal so far this season. So yeah, I'm not super excited about Pickens. Going over to Jackson Smith and Jigba, JSN 100% in flex consideration here. I mean, JSN was just so damn good in week 2. My concern is you had 49 dropbacks for Geno Smith. I think potentially those dropbacks come back down to earth just a bit against the Miami team that's going to have a very difficult time putting points up on the board. Now, obviously, if we see the passing volume be extremely high here in back-to-back weeks, and we see Tyler Lockett to just be an absolute 0 in back-to-back weeks, then I think JSN will rise higher than this. But for how it stands right now, we're going to put him at 31. We'll have Terry McLaurin at 32. Sadly, another player that will be in my lineup this week in the Flock League. It's a 12-team double flex format. McLaurin's done nothing. He had 8 targets last week. But Jaden Daniels has just dink, dunk, run. He's not throwing the ball deep downfield. He has the lowest intended air yards per pass attempt of any quarterback in the NFL so far this season. McLaurin had 8 targets last week, but those 8 targets Couldn't do anything with them in terms of big plays. So obviously we're going to hope that Jaden Daniels continues to improve as his rookie season goes on. But as it stands right now, it just hasn't been great. Going over to Shaheed in our next tier. Shaheed's been phenomenal. Like, let's go ahead and let me pull up NFL receiving leaders yards 2024. How high is Shaheed here currently? Where you had the blow up spot with the big play week 1 and you get another touchdown. Shaheed's right now tied with Devontae Adams at 169 receiving yards for the 8th best receiver so far in the NFL this season. Now, with this being said, he's only had 9 targets. With this being said, the New Orleans Saints have dropped over 40 points in both of their respective games. We have not had the ability to see what a normal Saints game looks like. I think maybe this week we get just that. Obviously, I'm completely fine with you throwing Shaheed into your flex this week. I definitely think he's in consideration, but the volume hasn't been there. Our priors on Shaheed were that he's a deep threat receiver that is going to be able to clear out space underneath for the other options in this offense. Right now, he's 4th in the NFL in yards per reception at 24.1. Obviously, it's going to be one of the most fluky statistics from a week-to-week perspective. And instead, we want to focus in on targets. I would much prefer Jameson, where we have seen more targets, and he's projecting out to be in a better offense this week. Now, our next receiver will be Brian Thomas Jr. If you are looking at Thomas, I am completely fine putting him ahead of Christian Kirk. Plus, you have no Evan Ingram in this game. You're going up against the Buffalo Bills, where you're 5.5-point dogs. So the assumption is Brian Thomas is going to be in an offense that has to throw the ball in the second half with one of their top weapons down in Evan Ingram. And the other quote-unquote wide receiver 1 here, Christian Kirk, has turned into a pumpkin. So I think Brian Thomas Jr. also becomes a very interesting flex play. Now, obviously, when you are in one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL, you always have to be in consideration for the flex. We're going to have Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir here. Just like we had last week, I think these guys are mid to low end wide receiver 3s until we see one of them take a step upwards and just begin to absolutely dominate target volume. Now, I don't necessarily know if we're going to see that this week. Going up against Jacksonville, it's probably a situation where they don't have to air it out, similar to what we saw last week against the Miami Dolphins. Right now, if you're looking at what we have with Keon Coleman, it's a receiver that has actually led this team in both snaps as well as routes run, both in week 1 and week 2. I'm going to assume that the rookie receiver continues to get better, but obviously Shakir has been the player that's had all the fantasy points in this offense. Deontay Johnson will be our next guy at 37. If we're looking at Deontay Johnson, he was somebody that we had no hope for coming into the season. We were looking at this offense saying, well, you know what? You have Leggett, you have Thielen, and some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL. Vegas is saying that this is going to be the 2nd lowest scoring offense in the NFL this week. That means we don't want a single receiver here. Well, Deontay Johnson just got an upgrade. Deontay Johnson getting Andy Dalton. According to sportsbooks, this is going to be a better spot. This is the highest implied team total that you've had for the Carolina Panthers this season at 17.5 points going up against the Raiders. So the Panthers are supposed to be better. Deontay has had a considerable amount of targets. I'm still not excited. It's still a bad offense where he still has target competition. I don't think he's as good as everybody says. So I'm still anti-Deontay Johnson, but I will admit he's probably better with Dalton. Roman Dunze will be our next guy at 38. I think DJ Moore continues to dominate target volume. With Rome, I still think he has a ton of upside, especially if Keenan Allen were to miss. If Keenan misses, I think you'd actually move Rome up to 35, definitely ahead of Keon Coleman. The issue is Caleb has looked horrendous. I drafted Caleb and Purdy at the very end of my draft thinking, oh, okay, both these guys have a ton of upside. I'll be able to play matchups. Caleb Williams as at the very bottom of the NFL in total passing volume. It's been a train wreck. Rome has long-term upside, but only if Caleb is able to increase the volume in this offense. Now, Jerry Jeudy will be our next guy at 39. If you look at Jeudy, he's actually at the very top of Cleveland in a bunch of different metrics here. Like, let's go ahead and let's pull this up for the Cleveland Browns. So while yes, Amari Cooper has had a considerable amount of target volume, and Amari is definitely a player that we're expecting to get better. If we are looking at the reception leader in this offense, you have Elijah Moore, then Jerry Jeudy, then Jerome Ford, and then Amari Cooper down there at 5. If you're looking at the receiving yards leader in this offense, Jerry Jeudy is leading this team in receiving with 98 yards. If you're looking at the only player to score a receiving touchdown in this offense, it is Jerry Jeudy. We are operating under the assumption that you have no David Njoku, so these receivers are going to get the vast majority of looks. Obviously, Jordan Atkins is not nearly as strong of a fill-in at tight end as Njoku would be. But Elijah Moore does have volume. You're going up against the Giants, so it should be a low-scoring game in general. And I do think that Amari probably bounces back, and Amari probably is the wide receiver 1, both for this week and rest of season, where just our priors with Amari, he was the best receiver in this offense, and he does have the most targets here with 17 through the first 2 weeks. Our next guy will be Darnell Mooney. Now, with Darnell Mooney, I understand everybody is going to scream at me that he is too low. I get it. I understand it. He was very good against the Philadelphia Eagles, probably the best receiver on the field against the Eagles. The big play is kind of the catalyst that maybe ended up winning them a game. But at the end of the day, if you were looking at the underlying volume, Darnell Mooney has had 4 receptions this season. Now, those 4 receptions have led to 103 receiving yards and the receiving touchdown. But at this point, he appears to be a boom-bust wide receiver that's in a very tough matchup going up against the Chiefs, where we know the Chiefs aren't going to allow too many boom-bust plays. Now, Christian Kirk will be our next guy at 41. I didn't like Kirk coming into the year because I thought his ceiling was severely capped. I honestly thought he would have given you a floor, though. And honestly, once Evan Ingram was labeled as out last week, I thought, okay, Christian Kirk's going to get volume. Maybe Kirk, you can play him. Kirk had -1 receiving yards last week. Going up against Buffalo, Jacksonville is definitely going to have to throw the ball. And at the same time, not only are they going to have to throw, but Christian Kirk should see more targets with no Evan Ingram in this game. Now, we said that last week, and look what happened. So, I don't know. I didn't like Kirk this year. Nothing this season has made me want to change my stance on that. He has just been absolutely horrible. Now, Jordan Addison will be our next guy at 42. Obviously, a bunch is in the air right now with the Minnesota Vikings receivers. You have Jefferson dealing with the quad. You have Addison dealing with the ankle. You actually have sportsbooks giving this Minnesota Vikings offense some credit. Right now, they are sitting with an implied team total of 22 points. And with Jordan Addison, I still stand by. I think that he is an extremely talented receiver. There's not really a wide receiver 3 of significance. So if you were to have Addison cleared for this game and Jefferson does not play, in that instance, I could move Jordan Addison probably up 15 slots in these rankings. So obviously, I'll update the rankings on flockfantasy.com every single day until we get to kickoff. But, I mean, Addison's also a player that may not play himself. Like, we just have no idea right now. Brandon Cooks will be our next guy at 43. If we are looking at Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert kind of ate his lunch last week. I think we're very close to ranking Jalen Tolbert straight up over Cooks. If you go over to Underdog, however, and you look at their projections for this week, you're actually seeing Brandon Cooks sitting with a mark of 41.5 receiving yards, whereas you have Jalen Tolbert at 28.5. So based off that and the larger sample that we have, I think you probably prefer Cooks. It should be a higher scoring game in general. I just think that Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert are so bad at the game of football. Now, our next tier drop will be Gabe Davis at 44. So obviously in these rankings, you've already seen that Brian Thomas Jr. has moved ahead of Christian Kirk. Kirk, if you don't perform this week, Gabe Davis will be the next guy taking that leap up. Davis running a ton of routes, playing a ton of snaps, has a massive role here, does appear to be a little more of a boom-bust receiver. Ladd McConkey at 45. This is going to be a really tough matchup going up against the Steelers. You have an implied team total of 17.5 points. Right now, Justin Herbert is banged up as well. Ladd McConkey obviously did nothing last week. Didn't have to do anything last week based off the fact that they were just able to run the ball over and over and over again. But yeah, probably not startable right now. Tyler Lockett, not startable. Looks like he just was lapped by JSN. Quentin Johnston, definitely worth the roster spot at the moment, And he's crushing for all the underdog best ball teams I took him on. Thank God. We're getting him at wide receiver 70. It was immaculate. But yeah, I can't trust him, especially not in this matchup with the banged up Herbert. Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, statement rankings here yet again, just like what we did last week. They're going to be so damn low, just to let you know you cannot consider starting them. This is a team that will have literally no passing volume unless Jordan Love comes in. Obviously, if Jordan Love plays this week, these guys will skyrocket up these rankings. But we are operating under the assumption it's a revenge game for Malik Willis. And if that's the case, no Packers player startable outside of Jacobs. And the Demarcus Robinson will be our last wide receiver. I definitely think you should be rostering the Rams receivers. But in terms of starting them this week, it's probably a little bit too early. I want to see what the target distribution is. I want to see how Sean McVay uses them. And then we can make the call to maybe put Demarcus Robinson in your starting lineup next week. But I think that's all I have for you. I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out with these ranks. Hopefully you don't have too many injuries. You're not having to look at the guys at 39 and beyond. But yeah, of course, if you wanted to check out any of those picks over on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description, comment section. If you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get the free CeeDee Lamb pick, more than less than half a total yard. An additional free pick on top of that if you're a new user. And you will get a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. Just make sure when you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address that you used on Underdog. That way I can credit you with your free team voucher. But I think that's what I got for you. Really do appreciate you. Really hope that y'all have a great day. And I hope I can hang out with you in the live stream later tonight.